Hey, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the pod. Today, we're going to talk about the Secret Legacy of Roundabouts, the state of the channel, and some DOS gaming madness dealing with maps I got into this weekend over the holiday. I hope to join us. Thanks for stopping by. So, let's talk about roundabouts. Everyone who's ever done anything mappy or civil engineering related loves them. I'm sure there's a cohort of people out there that really, really, really hate them. But for the most part, if you're kind of just in this community, if you come in at a base level, most people who read a little bit about urban design and development and traffic quieting and things like that, they really get into the idea of roundabouts being a solution to many problems. And of course, every time you might happen to be in America and you see the occasional roundabout, generally people get pretty excited about them. There's lots of talk about, Americans this, Americans that, what should we do? We should build a four-way stop. Let's bring traffic to a complete stop. All the jokes, all the quotes from The Life and Death of Great American Cities. Everybody likes to talk about roundabouts. But I was doing some research this week because I came across a roundabout in kind of a weird place. So, in my line of work, I tend to have to look and read a lot of subdivision plats, especially newer subdivision plats. And one thing that I noticed compared to old ones is that old subdivision plats, if you look at them, were very much built along the lines of like original surveys. They were built with townships in mind. They were built on these grids, very, like 90 degrees, 45 degrees, lots of nice round numbers. And something that subdivisions have started doing, or at least that I've started seeing, particularly in the area that I work in, is incorporating more adverse traffic things. Now, probably wasn't the clearest way to say it. What do I mean by that? Basically, the idea is if you put a whole bunch of straight lines through a subdivision and you make a bunch of blocks and boxes, you end up with very dangerous environments. You end up with a lot of cross streets and a lot of intersections, which inherently are just dangerous because you're including areas where people either stop or forget to stop or have incidents at their intersections. So that's a dangerous issue. And then you also have the fact that if you have in a straight line, psychologically, most people, when they see a straight line, just are going to drive faster because you don't feel that need to have to slow and be cautious. You get on a one-track mind, quite literally, and you go forward. And so if you're driving through a big subdivision with very straight lines, you tend to go faster. So what subdivision developers have started to realize, or they've realized from the beginning, I thought it was interesting that they seem to be realizing it more now inside of subdivisions, inside the big walled subdivisions, is creating things like roundabouts, creating one-way streets, creating impediments to traffic that make traffic slower, that traffic has to drive slower, be more aware. There's different methods of doing that, but it goes into so much of what the subdivision plan is. A lot of times when a subdivision is planned, it has to take into account, first off, the land, the lay of the land, but also the main thoroughfares in and out of the subdivision. It's very important. So when a subdivision begins, a lot of times they're going to design the road very close to the beginning. You're not going to say, well, let's put a bunch of residential lots here and then say, okay, well, how do we get in and get out? First thing we're going to do is say, okay, let's see what a normal road would look like through the subdivision that would run with the land, that would allow for drainage, and then how many of these additional acreages can we turn into plots or to residential area. So I thought that was really interesting, and I've seen the roundabout a whole lot in some of these neighborhoods, and a lot of times it's very obvious that it's a roundabout. Sometimes it's a little bit different. Sometimes you can kind of see what I think they call it it's a raised median, where basically the street will be a two-way street, but then at a certain point it will then split with a large raised median, and normally it will include like some sort of planter or a big wall, or maybe like your Stratton Oakmont name style subdivision, like something hills, something village, something castle. I don't know. It's supposed to sound like Jordan Belfort said, that it was carved on the, Plymouth Rock next to the Mayflower. Like that's what it sounds like. So, it can be a sign, it can be just entranceway. a lot of times that's basically, if you would think about it, it's an oval roundabout. So its legacy really lives on in terms of subdivision roadways now. They're not building them in straight lines anymore. Straight lines are very dangerous. So what do? They build curves into the lines of the road. There's going to be choke points in certain areas. Even something as simple as a greenway or drainage lots can be used to help slow down traffic. You think of something like, say, a park. If you install a park, you might install a lot of crosswalk signage. You might install a lot of right or left turn forcing on your different streets. That's another thing that a lot of municipalities have begun doing, is applying lots of forced turn or one-way, two-way street adjustments in order to make them a little bit safer, in that the traffic will have to drive slower and be more aware of what's going on. So if you think that roundabouts aren't being used, they are being used. It's just for public streets, they're definitely not as used these days. However, they're definitely being used in subdivisions a whole lot, which I thought was really, really interesting. And you can read a lot about roundabouts. Actually, one really interesting thing that I found out about was, in the past 25 years, there have been 7,000 roundabouts, give or take, built in the United States. And another really interesting thing is that in Texas specifically, there have been over 300 roundabouts built in the past 20 years. So I think more people are coming around to the idea of a four-way stop is quite a drastic thing to have to encounter. In fact, in the city where I live, there's a pretty notorious road. It's one of the most costly roads to drive on, just because there's so many accidents. So many people die on this road, and everybody in this area, whoever has to drive on this road, attributes it to subdivisions, where basically they'll spill out into the main thoroughfare, all the traffic into this main road, and then the main road has a four-way intersection, but it's like those intersections that have the two lanes, and it's just so challenging to drive through, just because there's so much traffic and it comes to a complete stop. So it's very interesting to kind of see where these old ideas are maybe being rediscovered or being reused for safety and for convenience, but they're not necessarily being put into the public space. They're being put into private spaces, and also to help the subdivision maintain other things. So say, for instance, like your property value, something that might cause your property value to go down is dangerous road conditions. If there's a lot of traffic noise, if people drive through your neighborhood very unsafely, it doesn't feel like it's a neighborhood that's quote unquote safe for children. So in order to maintain property values, they've actually implemented a lot of the safety features that we used to see in public, or that were implied or were applied to public use. They're now being resurrected and reused for private use. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. And I didn't know that so many roundabouts had actually been built in Texas so recently. But I guess with the advent of subdivisions and with a little bit different kind of planning that's been going on, I would say, yeah, from the past 20 years, that's kind of an interesting thing to see. So another thing I want to talk about today is the state of the channel. So if you're listening to this podcast, you might not really know kind of the story of the channel, kind of how it got started. So basically, I started this channel many years ago as a means to record training videos and just to get better acquainted with YouTube, because I've always been into video and I've always been into production, but also as a way to continue to just stretch my development skills and to share tutorials of things that I had learned at the very beginning when I had started using Google Earth Engine. Now, Google Earth Engine has just grown so much. The field has become so widely used and widely known. It seems like every week there's a new Git repository with some new scripts or new plugins or just new libraries to use within Google Earth Engine. And I'm just blown away, because there was a point where none of that was online, and just when the past few years it has just exploded. And there's so many people giving really interesting talks. So if you've not gotten into that world of Google Earth Engine, that's how this channel got started. Google Earth Engine forever. It's pretty great. It's an amazing piece of software, considering that when I started using it at the time, it was free and that it was just given to us to be able to do research. I can't get over how incredible that is and was, and the amount of potential that software has. So thank you, Google, for not killing it. I'm sure they might now that I talked about it. But let's talk about the YouTube channel if you're interested. If not, you can skip ahead. We won't talk about it forever. But let's talk about the YouTube channel. So one thing, big goal that I had for this year was to break out of Google Earth Engine just a little bit and to pursue some other things. So this year, you probably saw some content dealing with Mapbox. So that was one of the big goals this year, was to really push outside of my comfort zone, lean more into the development space, into the web design and things like that, and really work on building real applications. So Google Earth Engine is great, and there's a lot of really great application use for Google Earth Engine. But more often than not, I wanted to learn how to take these topics and to take this data that we really enjoy and we really find very interesting and make it into tangible products for everyday people. And I think that's one of the things that, especially as a geospatial person or a developer or someone who's interested in data, or even someone who's interested in urban development and civil engineering issues, is how do you take this data that you find very interesting and turn it into something that's beyond, well, I just make maps, or, oh, well, I just play with data, or, oh yeah, it's like Google Earth just with more stuff. By creating applications that provide the problem-solving ability for the people around us, it really gives you a really interesting perspective to be able to take these ideas, to take this data that we collect or that we sanitize or that we just find useful and bring it to the forefront. I think that's one of the really interesting things. I saw an application from one of the Mapbox developers that I follow on Twitter, and he created an application that was like a 311 for New York, which it was basically the ability to bring 311 reports to people to be able to see what's going on in their own neighborhoods. It's publicly available data, but he figured out a way to make it look nice, to sanitize it into an app, and then he's also able to collect and aggregate more data. One of the most interesting things that I saw in this application was the ability for people to define what they believe is their own neighborhood, and then name it, and then be able to apply analysis to their quote-unquote neighborhood. So the way that you define neighborhood is different from the way that I might define my neighborhood. I might say, oh yeah, well, our neighborhood goes from, my street where I live all the way to, this particular store or this particular coffee shop. But somebody who's lived there for 10 years might say, no, actually the neighborhood is within the walls of the subdivision. And yeah, it doesn't have the big entryway anymore, but it technically is just this subdivision, or it's maybe just this side of the road or that side of the road. So I found that very, very interesting. So that's one thing we're going to be leaning into this coming year, 2023. We're going to be continuing to lean into the dev space. We're going to be doing more coding tutorials. We're going to be doing more application development. We might get into a little bit of design and implementation of certain applications, kind of lean out of the data space a little bit, lean more into the dev space, get a little bit more creative, stretch our wings a little bit, and then we're going to do some QGIS, because QGIS is just wonderful. So we started doing that a little bit towards the end of the year. We're going to keep that up. Another thing that we really pushed this year on the channel, and I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it, but the blog. So I have been pushing the blog in most of my videos, letting you know, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what it would look like. Some of the articles that I write, I then turn into videos and vice versa. So if you're interested in some of the topics that we talk about here, but don't have a chance to either listen to the podcast or to watch the videos, or you want more details, that's usually what we do on the blog. The blog is a little bit more informational. It functions as both a blog and a newsletter, so you can actually subscribe to the blog, and it just goes to your email, and I send an email digest out about once a week, and that just has the latest blog post, kind of interesting things going on in the world of geospatial, different tools, lots of different resources, lots of stuff from the dev space, and lots of things from the geospatial space that I just can't make a video about, or don't want to spend the time, or don't have the time to research. But if it's something interesting, like, today I just read some information on, potential Esri price hikes, or things going on in the employment space, or things going on in the company space. It's not always something I'm going to make a video on, but it's definitely something I can share in an email digest to the people who are very interested in it. So that is there for you. And I wanted to say thank you for the people that are engaging with it. We've been running it for about a year. And we've seen a lot of really great traction on some really interesting articles. And so we're going to be leaning into those things because what we see you interacting with is also going to help us determine what works a little bit better and what is actually going to resonate with you and help you solve your problems that you have when it comes to geospatial issues or data issues. Along the lines of blog traction and analytics, let's talk about YouTube. So, as of shooting this podcast, I think we're on the cusp of 2,500 YouTube subscribers, which is incredible to me because I never thought it would grow that quickly. So, thank you so much if you are a subscriber. I really do appreciate you, and I appreciate interacting with you. I think going into 2023, that's going to be one of the bigger things that we focus on this year. Is we're going to focus on building a community and getting more interaction going. So if you've not followed me on the different social channels that I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram. So if you're on either of those platforms, feel free to follow me. I'll put the link to my socials in the description of this video or wherever you're listening to this as a way that we can interact and continue to keep the conversations going, because if it's only me talking, it's only a one-way conversation. I want to hear what you have to say. I also want to hear your ideas and what you're learning. I think one of the biggest things that has helped me grow this year just as a professional, as a developer, as a geospatial data person, has been the involvement in the community, has been getting to know other people. There was a long time where I thought that, this was a very small community. I knew a few people from school. I knew some kind of big names that you find when you Google things. I knew like professors and like business people and like kind of the thought leaders, but I didn't really know anybody boots on the ground that was doing this like I was. And to, in 2020, break through that door. And, I had just been standing on the outside, to be quite honest. I hadn't been engaging in it. I had just been doing my own thing and thinking it was just me. And then to break into this world and realize that there are so many incredibly talented people who are doing amazing, incredible work has been game changing as far as inspiration. It's helped me up my game. It's given me so much inspiration to continue to learn and to continue to develop my skills. So if you are not involved in the community, if you're just watching this, you're just listening to this, sitting on the sidelines thinking, okay, well, I just have to figure this out, I have to learn this, learn with other people. We are not islands. We are not here by ourselves. Social media can be used for terrible things. It can also be used for really, really good things. And interaction and community building is one of them. And I want to be a part of that. So if you're like, I don't know where to start, come follow me, come find me, and we'll get started together, and we're going to figure this thing out together. So thank you so much for a really great 2022. Looking forward to 2023 with all of y'all. Appreciate your comments. I appreciate your interaction and participation on all the fun stuff we do. And then to close it out, I wanted to talk a little bit about some really interesting mappy stuff I got into this weekend. So one thing you have to know about me, it's kind of a little bit of the typical millennial man, right? I play video games. I kind of missed the boat when it came to the initial video game craze. I had a DOS PC growing up, but I didn't know what that meant. I just was like, oh, this is our computer and here it goes. And like my parents gave me different like games. We were like a jumpstart family, so we did a ton of like the Learning Company, of all that kind of stuff. Like we did all of that, and then you'd get bored with it and you got a little bit older and you grew out of it, and so then you just start poking around on the computer. And then we found like the computer games, but then we didn't know, like my parents weren't really into that kind of stuff. They were like, oh well, gaming wasn't even a thing. It was just like, oh yeah, video games, that's what dumb kids do, so we don't do that. But then we had computer games. So I kind of came late to the party. Didn't really get involved with video games until I was much, much older, and then started enjoying them myself. And I think that was a good thing, but that's my own opinion. But coming back to certain old games, one of the ones I came back to this weekend because I was watching YouTube and I saw some really interesting videos about this Elder Scrolls game called Daggerfall. And if you don't know what it is, if you're familiar with the Elder Scrolls 5, that's Skyrim, there's 4 other games before that, right? So the second one is called Daggerfall, and it's a DOS game, and it's a 2D, 3D-ish kind of game that was really what started the genre. There was a game before it called Arena. It was people learning a lot about how to make an engine like this, and then Daggerfall was really their, strong sequel to Arena. So I decided to download it. It's free. You can play it. I'll put a link to where you can get Daggerfall. You can get it on Steam and play it. And I will seriously tell you, it is one of the largest games. And I didn't know this until one of my friends were talking about it. And he said, okay, well, what is this weird game you're playing? You know, it's weird. It looks boring. It's old. Why would you get into that? And I was like, well, I'm just kind of curious. I want to know, like, the progression through time. And he started reading to me some stats. And one of the things that he was telling me was that it's the size of the map in the game is humongous. It's 160,000 kilometers, which is incredibly huge. So the Skyrim, the fifth game, the newest game, which came out, I believe, like 10 years ago now. It's an old game by game standards. I think that's only like 50. It's very small compared to Daggerfall. And you might be wondering, oh, how is that even possible? The fact is that Daggerfall was built with a very limited code base. And when you get into the game, you realize how they can squeeze so much into so little. They can also make your perspective smaller to then feel like the game is bigger, if that makes sense. So in Skyrim, you have a certain size of character, and your character interacts with a world that's of that size. With Daggerfall, basically what they were able to do was they put you in these large landscapes, shrink your perspective down so small that it feels much larger, and it is much larger. But the problem is, and something I was really reading about that was very interesting, was people talk about how in the Elder Scrolls world, they have these big world maps that you can compare and say, okay, well, there's this nation, here's that nation, and Daggerfall is one of them. And so there's like this whole, place that you can kind of see and scale. Well, when you scale that map and compare it to maps of Skyrim, the scales completely don't match up, and it's kind of not really a big issue for the developers, but for people in the lore and in the community, they say, well, how are you going to scale these two maps together, because one is humongous, and then Skyrim is technically supposed to be like the same size on a map, but it actually isn't, but it actually is. So if you've not had a chance and you really are into old, very grindy games that are going to show you where things have come from, how things have progressed. Basically, it's an RPG in software form. It's extremely unforgiving. There's not a whole lot of telling you what to do, but it is very fun and very interesting if you like discovering new things or just seeing how technology has progressed. It's kind of like, putting a videotape into a VCR nowadays just to see how it works and to just have that tactile feel of, oh, this is what it was like before there was, skipping through chapters. You had to rewind videotapes. Like that physicalness of it is something that's so interesting. So with all of that, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. We'll have a new video coming out here pretty soon. Keep an eye out for my blog. I'll be posting articles on there. And also, if you don't have me on social, take a look at the links below and we will go from there. Thank you so much and have a great one.